Erick, Godsey, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, man, it's such a pleasure. You sent one of the best cold emails I've ever received from someone to come onto a podcast. So whatever you're doing, you're crushing it. It's
I
awesome.
appreciate that. Thank you. Um, and like I was saying just before we started recording, that I invited you on because I think you're a very unique voice in the kind of world of wellness spirituality. And I think a lot of the people who listen to this podcast probably haven't come across you and would really appreciate your and I think you're unique because you're very willing to kind of navigate the nuances in a world that's often very black and white.
Yeah.
And I think you're also not afraid to deviate from a general trend that you might be, or a general wave that you might be a part of. And I think that takes a lot of courage, and I think a lot of people would take inspiration from
Cool. Well, I hope that's true. I hope.
it.
Yeah.
Well, for people who are listening and going, who's Erick Godsey? Do you mind telling us a bit about yourself and how you came to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah. Where does it start? Because I have a podcast, because I write, I can be very verbose. And, to answer this question in one way, it could be a very long answer. But I think the essence of it is um, my mom had like pretty severe depression on and off as a kid, and so I was interested in psychology very early. And I was also, the Sam Harris acolyte style atheist in my teenage years. And then through tragedies and accidents, I somehow ended up at a private Baptist university in college. I
Okay.
was the first person in my family to graduate high school, and so I was the first one to go to college. And because nobody in my family knew how to play the game of college, the only place I ended up going was the place that sent me a acceptance letter that I had never sent one to. And it was like, the end of the year of high school, and I didn't have any plans. And my mom had the GI Bill because she had served in Afghanistan. And so I stumbled into college and promptly failed all my classes my first year because I didn't learn how to try, because I got away with just, being a smartass. And then I had like a pretty big existential crisis at the end of my first year of college where I started smoking weed, and then I watched a Joe Rogan stand up. I didn't know who Joe Rogan was at the time, and he made a joke about how we all think we're the smart people, but if the electricity goes out, what do we all do in this room? You guys all do what I do, and you sit and you wait. And if it doesn't come on in 2 minutes, you're like, these fucking idiots can't get the lights back on. But no one here knows how that works. And if all the people who knows how this shit works died, how soon until we're killing each other in the streets? And it was just the perfect combination of my failures and the marijuana and the joke, and it just popped something. And I just like turned my life around, but I also became kind of mentally ill. In hindsight, I clearly like went into schizoid episode, but I passed all my classes. I graduated, and I ended up at Chipotle because nobody in my family had graduated high school. I just didn't know what to do, and so I wanted to get a PhD in clinical psychology, but I just didn't know how to do it. And so I ended up reading the 4 Hour Work Week 3 times to understand what an entrepreneur was. Like, that's how disconnected my family was from agency in the world and from money being something that could be a tool. And I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that I wanted to learn how to be an entrepreneur so that I could study what I wanted to study without having to get grants from corporations or governments. Because that is, as I started to understand the game, I was like, I don't want to do that. And so I eventually heard about Aubrey Marcus, and I remember the day I was on a walk, and it was at night, and I was like looking up at the moon, and I was listening to a podcast, and I was like, I want to help Aubrey articulate his philosophy because I could feel that what he was trying to say was epic and important, but I felt like it could use some more uh, articulation. And I eventually got hired at On It. And I started out answering his DMs for his Instagram account. Like I started at the absolute bottom of the totem pole, and I got to see that he got more DMs from dudes with their shirts off, asking them how they could improve their abs than beautiful women. And I eventually like got on the radar of some of his close friends because they had desks by my desks, and I was super into Jungian psychology and I was interpreting people's dreams, and they eventually were like, "You need to go talk to this kid. He's not just a answerer of DMs." And so we talked a couple of times, and then he asked me to come on his podcast, and it was like the first time that I'd ever been on a podcast of, note. And he really like set me up for a huge layup where like it started off and like we talked about what it was like answering his DMs, but then it moved into the stages of the hero's journey. And it ended up being one of his most popular podcasts to date. And then he just kept having me on. And then after like 7 months, he was like, "Hey, I'm going to start a mastermind and I want you to be one of the coaches." And I was like, "Dude, I'm 28, and whoever can afford whatever it is you're about to do, I don't think I have anything to say to them." But he's really good at like calling people forward who have, something in them. Because I never planned on being a coach, and I really don't see myself as a coach. I see myself as a writer. Like in college, I started writing trip reports where I would take psychedelics and I would try to, as honestly as I could, like just share what I was doing. And, you know, 7 years later, I'm at a point now where I got featured in a film that I didn't know that I was going to be used as heavily as I was, and now I'm critiqued as being irresponsibly talking about whatever it is that I talk about. And yeah, like I'm in a life that's more interesting and weird than I had ever planned on. But, I got here by really just trying to tell the truth. And I'm fascinated with the human psyche and with how it can flourish. And I also um, have like a hip hop mentality in the sense of like, I'm just going to fucking say what I think is true. I'm going to remix anything that I think works. And there's kind of a like, fuck you, meet me in the streets and show me what you've made type of mentality.
Thanks for that. Uh, I want to get back to the interview, maybe, or the documentary at the end of the interview, if that's okay.
Cool.
But I think people have a good idea on the kind of special journey you've been on, particularly where you've come from. Um, and then I reached out to you, and part of what I said in the email was that I was really pulled um, by your project, the Shimmer project. Okay,
Yeah.
because what you were saying kind of articulated what I felt and what I think other people feel, but acknowledging it is too scary, and it's almost too big of a wave because of the kind of the state we're in society. So I don't want to speak that vague for people who are unsure, but if you could tell us a bit about the Shimmer project and how did it come about and how's it going?
Yeah. So, uh, again, I've recorded like 5 hours of podcast on trying to explain what the shimmer is, and I can talk a lot. So I'm going to try to have to use some effort to keep this succinct. So, at the beginning of the year, Aubrey actually gifted me a book. I'm looking over at my books trying to see if I can find it, but it's called Process and Event, and it's a really thick philosophy book. And Daniel Schmachtenberger gave it to Aubrey as a gift because he thought Aubrey would really resonate with it. And Aubrey flipped through it, and he was like, "I am never going to read this because it's a bunch of new words." And so he gave it to me for my birthday, and he wrote on the like inscript like on the inside page like if there's anyone I know who can grok this and do anything with it, it's you. And at first I was like, "Cool, you're re-gifting me a fucking philosophy book that Daniel Schmachtenberg gave you." But I started reading it, and I started with the glossary because it was like 100 page glossary. And I was reading the glossary on the airplane while I was flying home to see my family for the holidays. And I had, I have, I, all right. So when I first started to read Nietzsche in college, I felt like a audacity and a fire and a passion reading Nietzsche that was like, whoa, what is this? And I haven't felt that from philosophy since reading Nietzsche, and being like 19. And I was reading the glossary of this book and I was having that same type of experience. And I've only read like the first, I think, like four chapters of that book. That book is the sixth book in a six-book series that they have been working on for over 15 years. And the authors of that book, they're famous. Like they're regarded as like rock stars in in the philosophy circle because their first book of this series was at the very beginning of the emergence of the internet. And they made a bunch of super bold, weird predictions at that time about like how different parts of the world that as we knew it would transform because of the paradigm shifting technology that is the internet. And then they just like the weird predictions that they made, like they just kept coming true. And, like 2 years after that book dropped, they were, just regarded as like the super special kids in the philosophy circle. And the main thing I took away from that book was that the introduction of the technology of what we now call the internet is the fourth paradigm shifting, like world paradigm shifting technology. And they map it out as the first one was the invention of language. The second one was the invention of writing. The third one was the invention of the printing press. And now this one is the invention of intercommunication through wires and shit. And they break down how when these type of paradigm shifts happen, everything changes. And it normally takes, hundreds of years for the transformation to happen. And once I really, once I read that book, something in me landed as, oh my God, the internet is such a bigger deal than I ever thought. And then a month and a half after that, starting to read that book, I went into a darkness retreat for 6 days. And a bunch of cool things, happen when you're alone in complete dark for 6 days. But one of the things that really came through was that I was called to learn how to do the art form of horror. So at my artistic craft is writing. Like that's the craft that I'm, committed to for life, trying to be as good as I can at it. And I had never tried to write horror. And so after I came out of the darkness, I read Stephen King's book, The Stand. And long story short, I think Stephen King is one of the greatest, what I call a Dharma artist, where I think to write a book a year, every year for like 20 years, he would never call it, but he's like channeling. Like he's learned how to get into a flow state. And I think artists who master their skill can get to a point where they start to basically like channel dream content from the collective unconscious. And I can talk more about that at some point, but the podcast is only going to be an hour and a half, so we'll see. But I was reading his book, The Stand, and it just really hit me that like the essence of horror is like good horror, not like, gore or jump scare stuff, but like good horror is, can you look at the most brutal aspects of life and still thread the needle of the true, the good, and the beautiful through it? And so once I kind of like felt like I understood that, I had the intuition to rewatch the movie Annihilation by Alex Garland. And I'd watched it like two times before, but this time I rewatched it. And like, as I was watching it, I was like, oh my God, I think this is about the internet. Because the first two times I watched it, like, and everyone that I've talked to who has watched it, it's the same. It's like really good, very disturbing. No idea what the fuck it's about. And then as I'm watching it this most recent time, and I have this idea of like, is this about the internet? I started doing some research, and I'll try to keep this short, but I think it's super important because I I think it's a really big deal. So um, The movie is based off of a book, and the book came from a dude who is known as one of the best writers alive right now in a genre called weird fiction. And he had to get his wisdom teeth removed, and he was given some type of like opiate, and he had a weird dream. And in this weird dream, he was inside of a tower in the ground, but the tower was a living organism, and there was a apocalyptic poem growing on the wall of this living tower, and the poem was like spores, like that was growing out of the wall. And he woke up and he just started writing down the poem, like he remembered the poem. And this dude is a professional writer, and he said that he's never remembered more than just like a word from a dream. And so he wrote 1,000 words that night, and he showed it to his wife in the morning, and his wife was like, or he asked his wife, is this just me being high or is there something here? And his wife was like, this is a book. He wrote the book in 3 months. And for anyone who's ever tried to write a book, that's crazy fast. So he writes this book. This book comes out. It wins awards. People like it. And it lands on the desk of Alex Garland, who is the director of the movie Ex Machina. And Ex Machina is regarded as probably the best film exploring the weirdness that's going to arise as humans have to interact with, true artificial general intelligence. And this book lands on his desk, like his friend recommends it to him, as Alex Garland is in the process of editing the final cut of Ex Machina. And he starts reading this book, and he reads it in a couple of days. And in an interview I found, he said that this is the first original story that he's ever read as a director. And, for most people, they might not notice, but if you're a director, you know the secret. And the secret is that every popular movie, 97% of all the popular movies that have ever been made, they're the retelling of like six core stories. And humans just love to hear those stories over and over again. And so he was like, this is a different thing. That's interesting. And then he said that reading it felt like he was experiencing a dream. And so he had the spontaneous idea to write a adaptation and quote, he said, as if it were a dream responding to a dream. And so he wrote a dream adaptation where he never reread the original book after he read it the first time. He just basically, told it from his heart. And so as a Jungian, what I see there is that somebody, a artist who had mastery, had a skill, was able to channel dream content as and create it as dream content. That got passed to another artist who was a master at their craft, and they responded to it like it was a dream. So I think it had deep dream content in it. And in the film that was produced, I think it's the mixture of Jeff Vandermeer, the author of the original story. His thing that he's the most interested in is like the collapse of ecologies and what he calls the slow apocalypse of, us just not understanding the importance of ecology. And then the main problem that Alex Garland had been looking at was like, what the fuck are we going to do about artificial general intelligence? And those things merge into this movie. And so for me personally, without me, talking for too long, that landed in me as the most significant possible set of experiences that I could see to make this movie very important to me. And so I chose to interpret it like it was a dream,
Mhm.
like a dream from the collective. And so as I started to interpret it, I started to do research to see if my interpretation of this, like tracked with anything. And then as I was doing the research, I was like, oh my God. And basically, my conclusion is that I really genuinely think that the movie Annihilation is it's a new myth. And it's the collective human psyche trying to grok the arrival of a new, not even entity, but a new world, like a new environment. Like there's a new environment on the planet that has only gotten here about 20 years ago, and that it's changing everything. And that one of the byproducts of this new environment is that if you don't know how to use it or relate to it, it destroys your capacity to attend to things. And so the very function in the human consciousness that could notice this problem is the thing that is injured and consumed by it. And So I started talking about this thing, and it really resonated with a lot of people. And now it's something that, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And essentially, I think a couple of things. One, um, the spiritual person who thinks that they can just turn away from the shimmer and just go off on their farm or whatever. I don't think that's possible. I think it's either not understanding the scope of what is happening or it's choosing to be a coward. And I'll stand on that. And anyone who wants to talk about that, and I've talked about it with a lot of people. Two, um, I think the proper metaphor to understand the shimmer is that it's a new type of fire, and the fire is in everybody's pockets, and the fire is being given to children, and most people are do not know how to tend to this fire. And if you don't know how to tend to this fire will fucking consume you, and it will ruin your capacity to, like, listen to your whisper or your soul and do the thing that you're called here to do. And at the same time, if you learn how to tend this new technology, it is the gateway to the most radical democratization of access to true knowledge. But you have to learn how to deal with this thing. And I think the fundamental, like, superpower of our time is essentially learning how to stay connected to the thread of whatever it is that we're called to do while we interact with this new technology. And it's the reason you and me are talking right now.
Yeah, I really like that. I remember you mentioned, I think it was along the lines of the thing about the shimmer is if you don't go in knowing what your intention is, you'll get sucked in and you literally don't know where you'll end up. And people are getting to the point where they know that's not even a laughable comparison anymore. I mean, you can really end up on some weird Instagram page that sends a link to something else, and then all of a sudden, because you had the intention of looking at your friend's wedding or something like this, it really is like that. And that emphasis on attention, I think, is so significant, and it began to evolve within me. Like, how many times have we went to go on our phone for one reason and 20 minutes later, 40 minutes later, we're somewhere else? And I think we laugh it off. It's quite jovial. Oh yeah, like what was? Oh yeah, what was I even? Oh God! But it's a really serious thing because if that's happening collectively, like en masse over a long period of time, where is our? Where do we like? Because I often think one big thing for people who are into this kind of way of looking at the world is we have to distinguish between what is algorithm, like what is the algorithm, and what is fate or what is serendipity. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people that might be thinking it's fate and serendipity, but it's actually just pure algorithm taking you.
Yeah.
Um, so I would love
Yeah.
you to continue here.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One study has found that the average person in our generation checks their phone about 200 times a day. Without getting into the technical details, the real number is higher. And I could talk about why, but again, we don't have 2 hours. If you check your phone 200 times a day and you sleep for 8 hours a day, you're checking your phone on average about 4.9 minutes, every 4.9 minutes. And the amount of time that it takes for us to drop into a state of focus takes about 10 to 12 minutes, depending on the environment and how we're feeling. And so, statistically, the average person is perpetually, all day, distracted. And before the shimmer, that had never been the case. And I haven't found research on this, but I'm almost sure that there is. But that I think dropping into deep focus for a couple of hours a day is a base requirement for flourishing, akin to working out. And that if you don't get, like 10,000 steps a day at least, like there's studies that show that if you get less than 5,000 steps a day, um, your chances of being depressed and anxious go way up. And if you get over 5,000 steps a day, it goes way down. And, like we've evolved to walk, depending on what studies you look at, like 15 to 20 miles a day. Like that, just like that type of, and almost nobody gets that. And I think it's the same with our focus. I think that we're, and this is a whole rabbit hole, but it is such a rabbit hole and it's so interesting and it's very controversial. But just the essence of what I'll say is what Western culture thinks is average for how our consciousness works is very likely not the average, but just the normalization of a collective psychosis due to a sick environment that has prompted us to be perpetually distracted, and that what the Eastern practices and different schools of Buddhism have taught is no, you can literally make your mind what they call serviceable, which is to get to a level of focus that most people in the West don't believe is even possible.
And I was listening to the Shimmer series, and when you said that, I thought, I don't know if that's possible. I was one of those people. And even if, and this is what I think is important to know and for people listening, even if we don't reach what these Buddhists are talking about, this deep, deep level of focus, we can make considerable strides in the right direction for allowing us to experience more frequent moments of flow, periods of flow. And I think that's what should really encourage people listening. It's like, well, people might go, I have no interest in becoming the 4 hour meditator, or whatever. But if we could change the lens and go, well, is there something that you would actually like to give attention to for 20, 30 minutes or 40 minutes every day that is just kind of getting taken from you because of the push notifications and the algorithm, all of a sudden, like you said, because I also think we live in a society, right, where many of us have to do jobs that we don't feel called to, right? We will do it because we need the money, we have families to provide for, we have bills to pay. And many of us, I think, have this untapped thing. Well, oh, but I've always loved this and I've always loved that, but life, I can't get to it, and that is a big issue. And I'm happy to talk about that a bit later in terms of the broader structural issues. But there is this thing that we, by and large, can influence uh, by ourselves, and we can redirect our attention. And I think the listeners would love to know just a few of the tips that have come from, because they're quite simple. Like I can pretty much remember them myself, but it's better for you
Yeah.
to describe them.
Yeah. There's so many things that you just touched on that I would love to talk about more. But to answer the question directly, the very first thing is de-arm your phone. Your phone should not be allowed to ping you whenever the outside world or these apps that are created by corporations that are literally explicitly attempting to addict you to them. You should not let them be able to ping you whenever they want to. And it's really easy. It takes 10 minutes to like de-arm your phone. And if you do it, it will change. If you haven't done this and you just do this, it will change your life. And so if you type in like I could share the links with you, but I have this article and it's like reclaim your phone, and it goes step by step how to just de-arm your phone so that you don't get put like if you're getting push notifications from any social media, you are in the throes of an addiction, and it's okay, but it's so easy to fix. So that's one. The big thing, and I'm so surprised by how popular this has become amongst people who listen to what I talk about, because I've been doing it for a really long time, but I hadn't given it like a quippy name. And I've been trying to get my friends to do it with me since I fucking learned how to do it. And I haven't been able to get anybody to do it. And now that I've given it like a name, everyone's fucking, they're in love with it. But so it's called a Dharma sprint. And it's basically You set a timer for whatever amount of time that you want. Research shows that the optimal amount of time to attempt to focus on something is about 90 minutes before you need to take like a 15-minute break. So I normally, advocate for people to work up to 90 minutes. But you set a timer, and before you hit start, you either say out loud or you write down what is the one thing that you intend to work on for that 90 minutes. And you either do that one thing or you just sit there. And then once it's done, if you're doing it alone, just like write a quick review to yourself what it was like attempting to not task switch for an hour and a half, because multitasking is impossible. It's nuanced. The community that I lead, one of the most common questions that I get is every week somebody has a question about multitasking, and like people just hate the what the research makes very clear about it. But um, and the thing that's super interesting is people love to do this together, like over Zoom. And that was the thing that I was the most surprised by, because I taught this in a class that I taught at the beginning of the year. And I was super surprised by how active the people were outside of the actual class time, where they were doing these sprints with each other. And I've been doing some type of online teaching for a long time, and I've never seen this level of outside of class like activity. And so I paid attention. And so I created this thing called the Dharma Artist Collective. And like the main thing about it is we do sprints together. And I am just blown away continually by how impactful this, simple thing is, because it's really not anything new. Like I didn't create something new. I just put it inside of a frame that people seem to fuck with now. And um that is the place to start, is just like to view it like working out, and that you're trying to retrain your capacity to attend literally to anything. And like one of the things that people misunderstand about what a Dharma sprint is it doesn't have to be at your computer. It doesn't have to be, like you're working on an essay. You can have a sprint where the intention for the next hour and a half is you're just with whoever you're with and you don't check your fucking phone. Just be with the person, and like there's a lot of research that shows that if you check your phone when you're interacting with someone, it degrades both of y'all's subconscious perception of the quality of the intimacy of the interaction. If you have your phone within your field of vision while you're attempting to focus, your fluid intelligence and your working memory goes down. And the craziest thing about that study is you can know that the phone is not your phone, and you can know that the phone is turned off. And if you can see it in your field of vision, because most of us are so severely addicted to our phone, you can know it's off, you can know it's not yours, and your working memory and fluid intelligence both are markedly impaired, and so people have loved that. And then the other thing that I've started to offer people, where I'm really like Trojan horsing their individuation process, is I've talked about this thing called death cookies. And death cookies is a term that comes from the psychotherapist Phil Stutz. And basically, it's every day you should look for at least one thing that like in the privacy of your heart, you ought to do, but you've been avoiding, and you just do it. And what he talks about is, he and I both agree you have a soul, and you could call it your mind, but there's something inside of the human organism that has an innate desire to develop through clear, observable, scientifically modeled levels of development. And that if you don't go through those levels of development, you start to feel sick. And if you're moving through those levels of development, you feel meaning. And so, I think that that's what we mean by soul, which is like if you imagine human are like plants, there's something we want to do. And there's a certain way to treat the plant that allows the plant to grow. And there's a way to treat the plant that makes the plant sick. And that when you have the call from your intuition or your conscience or whatever you want to call it to do something, like to tell your partner the truth about that lie that you told, or to figure out how to leave the job, like the point that you were talking about earlier, there's a lot of people who know that the work that they do, they think they have to do it, but just the tough truth is, you don't have to. So just like find the place in you where you're agreeing to do it based off of whatever brutal facts you're currently choosing to accept. And I think that's mature and that's good. But we also live in, what David Deutsch calls the beginning of infinity. And there are an infinite set of yet undiscovered good explanations that would yield new knowledge that could allow new things to happen. And basically, you can improve your situation to the point where you don't have to give your entire life doing something that, that whisper has asked you not to do. And, but you can just start with like, do your taxes. Or if you haven't looked at your bank account, like so many people, especially in the quote unquote spiritual space, they fucking don't want to look at their bank account and they don't want to strategize about how to save money. And they just want to, close their eyes and say the prayer.
Money's a dirty word.
Yeah. And it's just
Yeah.
like, grow up. And this is a big part of what I'm trying to like share with people who are paying attention to the things I say is it's like, if you really begin to understand what the shimmer implies, I think you're morally obligated to figure out how to make money helping people and doing something that you enjoy to do. And it's not going to be easy. It took me 12 years to get to the point where, now if I want to, I can say no and, do my own thing. But, I think not only is money a dirty word, but, capitalism is, a cancerous word for most people. And entrepreneurship is an eye rolling thing for most people. And yeah, I think we just need some news stories about that.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up because I guess one thing that I wanted to roll with you on was the reluctance to acknowledge that there are bigger structural issues at hand in terms of particular issues. Okay, so say for instance, um, you talk very eloquently about how the culture that we live in is sick, and there's very few people that can describe it as healthy. I think. I mean, I think very few. I think very few people can do that. So people agree that the culture is sick, and one critique that I have of the general I don't know the general wave of what you're saying is absolutely true, but also if 10 million people listen to this podcast and say, okay, well, I'm just going to do this then, um, the economic structure, the policies that we have in place would kind of fall. And I wonder, is there something in you or, people that you're friends with in this space that think there needs to be a greater emphasis on, hey, you need to do things as well. Like it's not all around here, but also how are we actually going to change these structural issues that are essentially making us sick, making us unhappy? Yeah, I'd love your thoughts on this because I want to highlight that I agree with what you say. Like it is very inspiring, and I loved your story. It's beautiful. It will bring people to a warm place in their heart or their soul, and say I love that. But then there's this thing. But what if we collectively try and change this overarching policy that is getting in the
Yeah.
way?
Sure.
Or what if we try and change the incentive structures? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that I think about this is one, like a part of being mature is being able to admit what is your current level of competence. And the average person can't focus for an hour. So if you're going to try to talk to me about how to change capitalism, but you're checking your phone every 10 minutes while we're talking, you're wasting my time and you're lying to yourself because it's not capitalism right now at this level of the game for you. At this level of the game for you, it's about like, you don't know how to eat. Start there, and that like if we could admit and like a thing, I'm a tough quote unquote teacher in the sense that like I think I'm a really smart, stupid person. And I mean that absolutely sincerely that I think that, I am the byproduct of an incredibly sick generation in, the culture that I grew up in. And basically, all of my peers, we're all stupid compared to what our children could be if we, worked our entire lives at trying to put together a type of environment that could feed the things that children need to flourish. And there's a great quote by John Adams, and it's something along the lines of, "My father studied warcraft and like I'm going to butcher this quote, but I'll just keep it succinct. My father studied war so that I could study politics, so that my child could study art." And so the idea there is it's like, what are the things that we can do right now? And the way it feels to me, like first off, I think we all have callings, and I call it our dharma. And I think our calling is intelligently woven into us by the planet. And I don't care if people think that that sounds woo woo, but we've grown out of the earth, and I think the earth has the intelligence. And if you don't think, I'm not saying you, but if the listener is caught up there, cool. But um, the thing about a ecology is there's a bunch of different dharmas. So it's not everybody does the same thing. And it's like if we all accepted our level of actual influence, like whoever is going to resonate with me, it's not going to be 10 million people. It's going to be a specific type of person who has whatever type of thing. Then, I'm going to be singing the song to them of learn how to be responsible, learn how to make what I am calling Dharma artifacts, which is basically a way to do entrepreneurship where you just share the things that you have figured out that have helped heal you, and it's not about making $100 million business by making the next fucking, this is the place where all the courses are made. No, it's just fucking when you solve a problem, get over your own fear about sharing online and share it in a way where the people who will resonate with you can actually, learn from it and heal from it. And then as you grow your level of competence where you don't have to work a bullshit job at a soulless corporation that has the incentive structure that is, contributing to eating the planet, you could start to like pick up your head and look around your community and be like, okay, what can I do with the skills that I have? And then a big part of it is just recognizing that, you know, I think a part of mental flourishing is to seek mastery at some skill. And if you learn how to seek mastery at anything, you will begin to learn how to learn. And you'll also learn how to practice. And then if you learn how to learn and you learn how to practice, then you can start to look around your community and expand your sphere of competence from being, a year ago, I couldn't focus. Now that I can focus, I can now look up a bit and see what I can do. And that it's, a process because our culture is sick, but 97% of the people that I meet who are trying to talk about large issues, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to use this, but like their room's a mess. Like they're a fucking mess. And it's like, you only want to talk about like systemic racism, but like, you know, you're physically ill or you have a cocaine addiction or, you're a sex addict or whatever the thing is. And it's just like, can we talk about what's really in the room with us right now? What's in the room between, you and me is like, maybe you're upset with me about something, but that's kind of the essence.
I appreciate that. I wonder, do you think that the people that you're talking about, right? The people who are very much focused on the external and the systemic issues. I wonder, is there something that you think could be changed in your rhetoric that would actually facilitate them to also explore that as well? Because I'm very interested in this idea of communicators who are saying the difficult thing to people and that they kind of know it's true and they don't want to hear it, but it also reaffirms a truth for them, which is also a truth in society.
Yeah, so I guess what comes to mind is if you could try to channel one of those people, what do you think would be like what I am saying that would keep them from hearing me, just so I can like connect to a specific.
So, for instance, the person whose room is dirty, a bit of a mess, and they are working in a job for the last few years that they don't enjoy. They are a bit angry at the world, but they are also really angry at the rise in ethno nationalism, and they spend a lot of time online about this real pure discrimination, dehumanization going on, and they're very upset about that. Um, I feel as I'm familiar with some of these people, like they're in my life,
Yeah.
that they would resonate with what you're saying if it was a both and rather than a listen, man, just because I get kind of the Jordan Peterson's like, well, just clean your room and then it will be better. And also, these are big issues. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah, so like the thing that comes to mind is I'm not saying either or, I'm
Mm.
saying this then that. And so but like if I was talking like if I'm imagining, like this is how I would talk to a friend. If
Mm-hmm.
they brought that to me, I would ask something like with most of my friends, I would already kind of have an intuition of like what their like dharmic craft is, but let's just say that this is someone that I've just met. I would ask some questions like what is your favorite way to express yourself or who is your favorite artist? And just again, just for the sake of this fun, like channel one of your friends and try to just offer what they would say.
Um, my favorite artist is Kanye West, and I love all of his stuff. He makes me feel special when I listen to his music. Maybe apart from the last few albums.
Yeah, heard. Yeah, cool. So, do you make music or do you like write lyrics or poetry?
I sometimes I write, not that often. Sometimes I write. It's not good though.
Cool. Well, like what I would offer based off of, like 14 years of obsessively studying psychology is if you want to be a force, at helping the larger issues that you see, the personal calling is to start to dedicate yourself to the artistic craft of writing. And, depending on like, it would be a longer conversation and I would be more compassionate and I would move around it. But the end point would eventually be um, if you're, and this is not how I would say it to them. What, I'll try to say it to them the way that I would say it to them. It would be
Okay.
like, uh, if what you're saying is authentic, then it really feels like the call that I'm hearing from, your like deep self is to dedicate yourself to the practice of writing and like put yourself on a schedule like you are training, like you're an athlete. So, for example, when I started writing, my first kind of like task to myself was I copied the form of James Clear. And James Clear is a writer who writes about habits, blah, blah, blah. And the form was to write 2 articles a week between 1,000 and 2,000 words. Um, if you started to do that, I think you would start to feel a momentum in your life. And also, if you started to do that, some things would probably start to come up, like resistance in different parts. But if you channeled that consistently into your writing, you could actually start to develop a competency where you could start to talk about the things that, hurt your heart. Because to take in all this information about how the world is unjust, but to not have a artistic craft where you express yourself, you get like spiritually constipated. And it's like, go be a force. But being a force, is learning how to articulate your words consistently and potently. So I would recommend you start with Substack, or maybe you get on X and send me your first article, and commit to this practice, because the deeper point is, if you're not actually running away from the things that you are currently called to attend to by hiding in the pain of the world, if it's actually authentic, this is something that you would do without me having to suggest to you. You would develop a capacity to be competent in the world to talk about the things that you're talking about. And an Instagram comment is not going to move the needle for anything. But if you consistently wrote about the atrocities that you saw as an art form on a Substack or whatever it is for 2 years, you might get to the point where you get to write an article for the New York Times. You can actually start to put your voice out there and, advocate for the things that you see, but right now, what is your field of competence? And it's probably, hiding in a interdynamic with me by talking about the things that make you mad. But it's, like,
Yeah, what comes up for me is the idea that I think I'm kind of good at being around people who disagree with each other and trying to facilitate a place where they still respect one another and they can still allow each other to have their differing opinion and to find something, to find some common ground, because there usually is. And I like the idea of trying to hold more and more conversations between people who are disagreeing with each other, who frequently dehumanize each other online. Um, but I guess that will probably be the example that you're talking about. That's probably my way, how I'd like to help people, the society where we're so polarized, where we can't be in the room with someone who we disagree with on something strong, or we dehumanize them because they said something that I disagree with. Um, but appreciate this. Like I do, I value it because it's difficult, and I think that I think what you're saying has a lot of validity because people have more capacity when they do feel inspired, when they do feel like a connection with themselves, a deeper connection with themselves, which they often get through exploring the thing that they love or connecting with themselves. And speaking of connecting with themselves, um, part of your kind of anti-shimmer or like shimmer safeguarding is a meditation practice. What I think is it will be very quickly helpful before we talk about is just maybe to give people a background or an idea of your background with meditation. Because following your newsletter, I got the idea that you did meditate, but it wasn't incredibly consistent. It had highs and lows. And
yep,
then with the Shimmer project, you kind of said, enough's enough.
yep. So, um, I have a degree in cognitive psychology, and so I have a high resolution, scientifically informed map of how the conscious mind works. And but I didn't learn anything about meditating when I was in college. And then before I got my job at Onnit like 7 years ago, I was unemployed for a year, and I was just living off. I think I made like 9K stretch over the course of 10 months. And then my mom could tell that I was struggling. And she was like, hey, you want to come visit for Thanksgiving and then stay for Christmas? But during that time, uh, I was trying to write like a SEO, like good article on meditation because I was trying to, work out the entrepreneurial thing. And so I got a couple of books, and I wrote a synopsis of, I think, like 62 studies that all came from the book Altered Traits, which is an incredible book on the science of meditation. And as I was working on that for like a month, it got me to actually start to meditate. And I did probably about 6 weeks where I was doing like at least half an hour every day. And I had a couple of days where I would do like an hour and a half. And I got to a pretty cool place. And then, I ran out of money. I moved in with my parents, and then I accidentally ate 180 milligrams of THC and had the hardest experience of my life. And then a week after that, I applied to on it and I got the job. And then I moved to Austin, and then it was just like a whirlwind. And um, I didn't get back into a consistent meditation practice until um, I started talking about the Shimmer again. Like I would do it on and off, but I wouldn't link 4 days in a row of at least 20 minutes. Actually, I had probably about two windows where I would do it for maybe 2 months, where I would do it for like 20 minutes a day. But since talking about the Shimmer, um, I've been back on it, and it's, you know, I don't know if this is true for you, but when I don't smoke weed for a long time and then I smoke weed and it's just a small amount and it's the right amount, I'm like, God, this is so nice. Why don't I do this more? The cleanest version of that is when I meditate, and it's just like, wow. And, but the other thing that I have found is actually making these Dharma sprints, like the core activity of the community that I've created. It's not as good as meditating, but it's like the closest uh like it's the what's the word I'm looking for? It's the closest like LITE version, like light version of meditation that I've been able to get basically anybody to do. Like you can't talk anyone into actually I haven't been able to talk anyone into actually sitting the fuck down. But I have gotten, a few hundred people to start to do these sprints. And I feel like it's a Trojan horse to eventually getting them like, hey, you think this is good? This is like, 1/10 of what it's like to actually sit down.
And I really, because I had never, like, I would have had a bit of a meditation practice for the last few years, like every morning and often in the evenings. But I had never done the meditation practice that you're kind of encouraging, which is this very specific counting. So you're counting one, two, three, and then if you forget or if you lost where you are in the count up to 10, you start again. And I found it really good for my focus. But then I don't know if this is also because other circumstances led me to explore what the relationship between my meditation practice was and my emotional sensitivity. And I thought you'd be a really interesting person to talk to this about because so many of your newsletters start with you having these profound emotional experiences.
That's true. Yeah.
Um, and I wondered, have you noticed a difference since this daily practice with the emotional sensitivity?
So I am a weird outlier. And I have a much deeper relationship to my dreams than I do a meditation practice. And I've been like, my relationship to my dreams is what like an actual Christian's relationship is with to God or like the Holy Spirit. And I have that like whatever the nourishing aspect of a truly devout religious person, what they get out of their like healthy relationship with the all. Um, I have that with dreams, and it's so hard to explain this to my friends because, they see me as someone who is the least religious person that they know. But like Caitlin, my partner, knows that I'm actually like the most religious person that she knows. It's just different. And it's like, so the respect that I have for my dreams is, as high as it can be. And if you learn how to work with your dreams and you understand parts work, like internal family systems, once a week I'm crying about something that I've, detected from the dreams. And I also have a relationship with my emotions because I irresponsibly blew apart my mind in my 20s with psychedelics, and I don't recommend it to people. But I now like I love how it feels to cry from being moved. I cried today. I cried before our call today. I've been listening to a biography about Kobe Bryant because I see him as a paragon of mental grit. And I've been just trying to, like, absorb the best parts of his life, as like a part of me to help me be more, um, to have more grit. And I watched on YouTube his last game that he played where he scored 60. And I don't know if you know a lot about him, but he died in a helicopter crash with his daughter. And I wept today, like it's making me emotional now. Uh, just seeing, yeah, I won't talk about it too much because I'll start crying. But yeah, so for me, I'm an outlier because I do know that some people report that they get like a emotional numbing. But here's the thing that's interesting. It's like in the like school of Buddhism and the lineage that I have been studying, it like I'm not in the Sam Harris camp, even though I love his Waking Up app. I think it's a great like intro. But where he goes with his Dzogchen insights seems to me to be, I don't know, it feels like he's playing like a linguistic game. And I don't know who he's playing that game with, and I don't know who hurt him, but it feels like he's really trying really hard to play. He's trying to beat somebody at some game, and everybody else is just kind of in the wake of it. But what I've read and what I've experienced is that you actually get more in touch with your emotions. Like you start to slowly slow down the mind that is always trying to distract. And as you feel that distractions start to calm down, emotions start to arise. And again, because maybe I'm an outlier, because I have a lot of practice with somatic therapies and like trauma release. And I did a deep dive for a couple of years on trauma and like how somatic trauma wants to move and how it looks like you're shaking. And, how just yesterday I was doing some like Kundalini stuff and I got into a place where my leg started to shake and I just allowed it to shake because, I know that that's actually good. Um, so, with the caveat of me being an outlier, is there a more specific question that you feel like I could, elucidate the audience with?
Yeah, I guess for men listening who are interested in this discussion, I think many of them do feel that they don't have access to the emotions that a lot of women have, or a lot of
Mm.
sensitive men would. And I think maybe you could just unpack either a little bit more in terms of because because it's difficult, right? Because I say I'm speak for myself, okay? Like I've started to kind of explore internal family systems the last few weeks,
Cool.
and I find it hard. People would say, "Okay, sit, and what do you notice?" And I'll say, "I notice very little." Okay, what's going on? What do you feel? Not that much, and I think that can often turn a lot of men off.
Yeah.
There and I for a while I used to be proud of my kind of quote unquote stability,
Mm,
this
yeah.
consistency of almost not feeling that much.
Yeah.
Whereas now the internal family systems model has encouraged me actually no, it'd be very great if you could tap into these feelings because they're deep down and they give you a greater kind of whole connection. Maybe that gives you something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, internal family systems is very hard to do on yourself. I have found that it's so much easier, even if I have someone who's not that skilled, to be prompting me because it allows me to like step outside of the mind that's trying to do. So I just want to share that I also struggle to do it on myself. So there's a couple of things here. One is like I think the answer, I mean, at least what the answer has been for me is Jungian psychology. And so the first thing, and I'm sure most people, because it's now just in our popular culture, but they'll understand the idea that you have a shadow. And your shadow is, the contents of your consciousness that you can't voluntarily access, but that they are there. And for example, every man here in your shadow is the part that wants to fuck most of the women that you see today. Period. There is a part of you as a man that wants to be the fucking king wherever you go. And that's in you. There's a part of you that wants to be famous. Not fame for its own sake, but you want to be the one who calls the shots. You want to be known and you want to be respected by everybody that you see. Most people, won't accept those parts of them as being real. In Jungian psychology, it's kind of like, the big three things in the shadow to integrate are you want to fuck, you want to fight, and you want to be the best. And it's just everybody has that in them. And there's way darker shit in all of us, but we don't need to go there because that will be even harder for people to accept. But um, once you start to like admit that that's at least there, then you can start to get curious about like the thing I love about Jungian psychology is it kind of feels like a spooky horror story if you really start to accept the story that he's laying out. And it's that who you think you are is a fraction of what is going on in you. Your conscious mind is 1% of what's happening in you. And uh, that thing that is that 1% that you think you are is actually a collection of parts that are your like integrated parts, but what IFS would call your managers. But then in your shadow, you have a bunch of what IFS calls as firefighters and exiles. And so your firefighters are the ones that like step in when you feel very unsafe. So, if you've ever been in a situation where afterwards you were like, I don't know what came over me, that wasn't me. That is a firefighter. If you have a addiction, like most men, you're addicted to porn. Like if you're in my generation, it's not your fault. You got hit by a fucking comet and our parents couldn't even see it. And unless you've done profound work, you're addicted to porn. All of us. Every motherfucker here who has access to the internet, unless you've done something profound personally, you're addicted. That addict is what Jung would call a complex and what IFS would call a firefighter. And for most men, they do it to like decompress, to like get that, little squirt of like, and but everybody has exiles. And so every man listening, there was a time when you were a boy. And there was a time where like a thing in the spiritual space is people love to gaslight their own pain by saying like my life wasn't that bad because they think, just the worst examples that they could think of. But one of the things that I constantly have to reflect to people to give their exiles permission to exist is everybody has a personal 10 out of 10. Everybody listening has a personal 10 out of 10 of when they felt betrayed, of when they felt abandoned, of when they felt unworthy, of when they felt like they weren't man enough or they weren't strong enough. And everybody has, that set of tens in them. And a part of becoming a adult is that when those parts get activated, that they're allowed to be in the room. And what that means is like that emotion is allowed to come through you. But most men, have a protector that they can't see. And that protector is the guard that doesn't let any fucking exile in no matter what. But the byproduct of that is you might be an alcoholic, or you might be a workaholic, or you might have a secret resentment against women that have you unconsciously be in relationships where you don't treat them well and they don't treat you well. And then you can just reestablish your belief that women are, fucked up or bad or whatever. And that the Jungian lens is if you start to listen to your dreams and you actually learn how to listen to them. And for anyone interested, the best book that I've found on this is called Inner Work by Robert Johnson. It's the clearest. Uh, Jung wasn't clear, and a lot of Jungians like to also not be clear. And Robert Johnson is a maverick in that he dares to be clear. And so, Inner Work by Robert Johnson is clear. A couple of other books that I would recommend for men here is the first one is called Iron John by Robert Bly. Have you read this? So, when I read Iron John, I think I was like 29 or 30, and it's the only book that I can remember where I cried so hard reading it that tears fell on the page. And it was at the part where he was talking about how like young men have a requirement to be in the presence of actual integrated men. And that as a child, if you get to be in the presence of a present father, there's a mana, a bread, like energetically that gets exchanged between you and him. And that most people in our culture didn't get that. And as I read that, I cried because it's true. I didn't get that from my dad. And that, um, like, just what can start to open people up is to begin to admit to themselves, their traumas or their shortcomings. And it's our culture loves, like, we are now at the wave with the word trauma, where now it's cool to make fun of, the generation that is all about trauma. And there for sure, you can hide in your labels, but you can also hide in the mocking of the people who are actually admitting to themselves that they have scars.
And I feel compelled to just mention the fact that a kind of a spiritual personality can also be a manager.
Yeah.
In this,
Okay.
and it would be nice if you could speak on this because one of my favorite ever newsletters that you ever wrote, I think it was about 2 years ago. I know a friend of yours passed away very suddenly, and there was a lot of people in the community that you were around that seemed to have gone straight to the
Yeah.
the kind of wise thing to say about it. It must have been his time. These kind of things that you hear very often, and you kind of felt really strongly that listen, we need to feel the pain of this beautiful person that passed. And I thought that was very courageous because uh, you are a big figure in a world that can very often use the spiritual personality to skip certain difficulties.
Yeah. Um, I don't agree with most when people think about the quote unquote spiritual community, and if people think that I'm a big voice in that community, if you wrote out like what are the beliefs of that spiritual community, I don't believe almost any of them. And and
Yeah.
um and the people who are close to me know that, and like, I've had long conversations with everybody around me about all of those things. I think one of the biggest missing holes in the spiritual community is one, um, an appreciation for the scientific method. I just have no fucking time for people who want to talk about complex things or metaphysics, but don't have don't appreciate the scientific method enough to be able to read a study. Like, what the fuck is wrong with us? So that's one. Two is a deep appreciation for evolution as it has been uncovered by the scientific process. Like, it fucking blows my mind. If you have the education to be able to understand this scientific process, and it's not this perfect thing where whatever they say is true, but if you understand how it works and you look at the field of evolutionary biology, it is one of the I'm getting goosebumps. It is one of the greatest articulations of aspects of human psychology and nature that has ever been produced by humanity. And it's one of the closest like soft sciences to a hard science. Like it's premier. And if just spend a year trying to grok the worldview that comes out of that system of investigation, you will then have an appreciation for like your body is has programs or has whatever metaphor you want to use, but we're animals. We seem to have a like spiritual capacity, and I fully, you know, like there is room for that. But you have a liver and you have a stomach and you have skin, and there are laws of physics that can like one of my favorite jokes to say to like a group of spiritual people is it's convenient that once we discovered phones and video and cameras that there's not a single yogi levitating, and that my personal belief is I don't care who you are. If you step off of the roof of a 100-story building, not only will you will fall at a rate that we can use mathematics to precisely measure the speed with which you will fall. And no matter who you are, you're going to die when you hit the pavement. And, I've triggered a lot of people talking about that. And
Mm.
the best argument that it's not even the best retort is that there is a field of belief that comes out of cameras that distorts the yogi's power to be able to, and it's just like, or it's not something that is within the realm of the laws of physics. And can we talk about something more interesting? And so um, I say all of that to say, like, the human animal experiences grief like it's a physical wound. And there's something about crying, about weeping, that is a type of like release. Like if you have a tight muscle and you put the right amount of pressure on it, it's painful at first. But if you hold it there, the knot releases. And I think there's something like that that happens in our inner world where it's like if you have pain and you're able to hold your consciousness in the pain, it eventually moves. But if you ignore it, you now have a knot. And it's like once you get like for me, like why I cry so much is because once you start to like a person who doesn't know how to roll out their own muscles, they are condemned to having to wait for someone who knows how to do it to them. And there's a lack of agency, like a fundamental agency. Like you should know how to release your own muscles. It's just like if we lived in a healthy culture, you would learn that by age 10. I think it's also equivalent to our inner world, where it's like if you can't if you don't develop the capacity to stay with an uncomfortable emotion, you will either become perpetually a customer to a pharma company, and they would love that. And we could talk about that and get me canceled because I have strong opinions on that apparently I'm not allowed to talk about because I don't have the right letters at the end of my name, and I can talk about that more. But um, so like grieving is one of the things like the whole love and light thing is just like no, whatever life is, it's both. And without going down rabbit holes, one of Jung's like critiques of modern Christianity was that it cut God in half, and that he predicted that that would create a mass psychosis because we now have put into the shadow all the uncomfortable stuff. And if you do that, it will haunt you. And he has this quote: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. And so if you have a friend who dies and you jump to the spiritual bypassing, you have put something into your shadow that will haunt you. And I'd rather not be haunted, so I'll cry.
Yes, a beautiful next step would be to just address what you're about to address there.
Yeah.
So I guess for people who might be new to Eric, Eric's friend Aubrey, who we mentioned before, former owner of On It, he made this documentary called The Anti-Cult, in which he basically documents several meetings of the community that he has, a community called Fit for Service, and then basically the camera's there to just see, to allow people see, oh, what actually goes on behind closed doors, if you will, what's happening. Um, I guess the, what's interesting for me is like because I don't particularly want to talk about. I don't want easy shots. I guess I want to ask you, what did you learn from the feedback from the documentary? I get will be.
Yeah. Um, so literally 99.99% of the feedback that I got was like, uh, wow, Eric, I didn't know that what you did was this cool, and I didn't know that you were such a big part of it. And I felt uncomfortable receiving that praise because I didn't know that I was going to be featured in the way that I was. Because like basically the way that it worked was I did one interview, like 8 months before, and then I didn't hear anything about it, and then it came out, and then I was like, wow, I'm all over this thing, you know. And the one critique that I got came from I'm forgetting his name, but it's one of the three hosts of the Conspirituality podcast, and he reached out to me on Instagram, and he basically was like, "Hey, I'm listening to your talk about the Shimmer. Do you have? You mentioned that you have an article with some resources," and I sent him the article because I didn't know who he was. I was like, "Ooh, there's someone who actually wants to read my citations. Yay!" Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I would love that, and nobody does. And so I sent it to him, and then he sent a really long list of critiques, and I was reading it, and I could tell, like, I don't know. So there's a couple of things. People on the outside, I don't think understand. Like, I'm close with the other coaches, but we're all our own people, and like we're not in the same house, and it might be weeks in between when we hang out, and like when we hang out, like we play sports and we fucking talk shit, and it's not as intricate as people think, and
And you don't agree on everything with each other.
for, for sure, like I specifically am the dude in my friend group where it's like they know if they want to talk about anything spiritual, and I'm present, it's either that there will just be a long, intricate talk because I actually don't agree with most ideas. But again, on the inside, that's such not a big deal.
Mm.
But I think on the outside, it like if people heard that, they would be like, "What?" But so, and I'm telling this story to get to the thing that I learned from this is so I could tell that he was assuming that I would be like angry or annoyed by like his response, and I was elated. Like I want I wanted to, and I still and I might still get a PhD in clinical psychology because I yearn for that type of intellectual, like, no, help me see what I don't see because I feel like I'm like a stranger in a strange land trying to do research and learn, and I don't have anybody around me who either has the attention span or cares enough to get into like the details. And so I asked him for his email because my response was too long to fit into Instagram. And I don't know how he was able to send such. I think he must have written it from his computer. But so I sent him a response, and I went through every point, and I thanked him on the points that I got wrong, and I shared with him like, hey, a lot of the things that you think I'm wrong on, here's where I got it from, and the people I got it from. Like, I don't think you can argue with their credentials, man. I was just like, I'd love to hear what you think. And so we go back and forth a couple of times, and then he's like, and I was being super, like I kept saying, like, thank you, this is awesome. And then after a while, he was like, don't thank me too quick. We just released a podcast on blah, blah, blah. And my response to him was like, I don't know what you thought I thought, but when you reached out and I learned who you were, I expected that this is exactly why you reached out. And I could tell that you were surprised because I think, I don't know what, I don't know if he's had interactions with Aubrey, because again, we don't talk like that, and like he's not sharing with me who talks to him in DMs or whatever, but it,
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it felt like maybe he had a back and forth with Aubrey that didn't go well, but I don't know. And without getting into the details, because I want to respect his privacy, I could tell that because of things that he had gone through when he was young, what he thinks is happening on the inside over here is so not what is happening over here. But I don't feel obligated to try to like change his opinion. But it was the thing I took away from it is it's like even the people who are trying to specialize in like not getting caught in projection and echo chambers, it was just like really feeling like uh really missing what is happening. And it was just like it was humbling, that it was humbling for me to feel that someone who was making it their, like priority to be good at, was still missing as just the tone and what he thought was happening just wasn't and isn't the case. And, so it was humbling to feel just how hard it is for us to see outside of our echo chambers. And because I'm a Jungian, to feel that in him, I instantly am like, and that's me too, So like whatever my like staunch things are that I'm righteous or that I feel like I'm righteous in, you know, I could be missing just as much.
Yeah. And uh, what I felt or what I was thinking about the whole situation was that this could have been so fruitful because had he said something like what he said, oh, I'd just love to ask some more questions. Maybe we could have an interview about it if you agreed or whatever. That could be a real fruitful discussion with good faith. But it felt like he tried to put you in the box, and if you tried to just like explain yourself, he still was just like, no, he's in that box. And the thing is, I listen to the podcast. I think sometimes it's really fruitful critique. It's very necessary because I do think the general thing, what they're approaching, you guys actually agree with each other in terms of you're saying that you disagree with so much of what's common in the culture. But I think often this particular podcast, Conspirituality, that could be so fruitful in a world where there's a lot of squirrely things to navigate, you've actually you haven't provided hope for an audience where then we can make progress because there's not going to be progress when both people are just like I'm right. You know what I mean? Like surely there's things that you can both learn from each other and move on. But it was kind of, oh, I'm right about this. You're doing some crazy stuff there. I don't really want to know, but this is why it's crazy stuff. Um, it doesn't fulfill what I think we need, and that's why I want to ask you again in terms of the next steps, because obviously you say you disagree with a lot what's going on in the broader culture. Is there something that you feel, oh, this really needs to happen as a next step for us to either become what we describe as more integrated in terms of navigating what you said, talking with people who aren't in your immediate kind of community.
Yeah.
Have you thought about this before?
Yeah. So I haven't listened to the podcast.
Okay.
And so I would love to just hear from you. What do you think are the best gems from that episode that I could like integrate? And it's just like I haven't listened to a podcast in, probably about 4 or 5 months. So I have a thing where like I prefer books over podcasts most of the time because there's just I get so much more from reading books. And I have seasons where I'll listen to podcasts, but it's like a couple of months a year. But for the rest of the year, especially when I'm creating something, it's books.
Yeah.
Um, but like I enjoy the back and forth I had with him. And yeah, so I would love to hear just real quick, like what were the best gems?
I guess quickly, credentials, right? There's an like you're coming from a scientific background. These guys really want credentials to be justifying the coaches with their particular niche, right? Th- And that in itself, I think, is a beautiful conversation to have because a lot of people have obviously had experiences with you that felt more fruitful, felt like they were on the right path compared to previous people who might have had credentials. And I feel so that's one thing. Sorry, credentials in terms of um I guess the over individuation of ills. So, as in, there's an acknowledgement that society is sick, but it's almost like the answer to society being sick is you work endlessly on yourself, and then the society won't be sick anymore. Rather than what are the big trends in society that could shake up the obvious trends?
Cool.
And then the rest of them are kind of easy jabs and just like not fruitful at all.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of two arguments that I took away really.
Yeah. So when it comes to the credentials thing, like the like what was really interesting is like a lot of his big critiques about like how I was interpreting Buddhism and how I was talking about meditation. I gave him the two books that I pulled from, which the each book had one book had three PhDs, and the other one was written by two PhDs. And the collective citation of studies between the two books is over 300. And the main dude that I pulled from is Daniel P. Brown. And when you want to play the credentials game, if anyone here wants to go look up Daniel P. Brown, uh, his way of so first he hadn't heard of Brown, and once he started to look into Brown, his critique of Brown was that with someone with a resume like that, I don't see how he could have had time to do deep research on the things that he was claiming. And it's like, that's an interesting game where there isn't credentials, they're invalidated because they don't have their credentials. But then when I share the person who like I'm not saying things that I think are true. And if I ever say something that isn't coming directly from someone who has done a lifetime of research, I do my best to say, like, hey, this is my opinion. This is not sharing, blah, blah, blah. And then when I shared who that person was, he, he's too credentialed to actually have the time to do the deep work. And it's just like, I'm not willing to say that this dude's resume isn't legit. That seems like quite a large thing to say. But like, I think one of the things that's disturbing, I think, to the older generation is that because of the Shimmer, there is a new type of expertise that is emerging. And it's an expertise of, I've done the thing in public. I can show you exactly how I've done the thing. What I'm offering is the exact thing I've done, where that is a direct um, transference of competence, whereas a credential is a proxy. A credential is, I have taken this type of training, therefore I am qualified to do X. And I'm not saying that that's not awesome. Like, I'm never going to get on a plane by someone who said that they, took mushrooms and they got taught by a spirit how to fly a plane. Not doing that. But at the same time, and this is, a dumb example, but it's to highlight the point. If there was someone who for 10 years they taught themselves how to fly and every time they flew, they recorded it on Twitch. and they had 10 years of experience flying and they don't have a credential, and I'm lost on an island and that's the only person that I can call on, I will have no hesitation. I'll just fucking do it. But to the people who have the investment that they've put into getting their credentials, if they see someone on the Shimmer having success and they don't have their credentials, there's going to be an obvious, like, that doesn't feel right, you know? And at the same time, there are a bunch of motherfuckers out here who don't have credentials who are, who suck.
Yes.
But for me
Yeah.
personally, like, I deeply admire the scientific process. And I, like, if I talk about anything confidently, I have citations, and if I don't, I do my best to make clear that I, don't. And to get to the crux of it, the core thing that I have taught Fit for Service for 7 years is to journal. That, like, that has been my recommendation is practice telling yourself the truth. And I have citations and it's not me making stuff up. It's like there's hundreds of studies that show that if you write in this style for a couple of days in a row, you're less likely to get sick for the next year. Your scores on depression go down, and just in the last year, now the next thing I've been adding is journal and meditate. And it's like, if you don't think that that's appropriate for me to talk about, cool. Now, the specifics of their point was I was interwoven in that podcast or in that documentary with Kelly Brogan talking about like,
Pharmacology.
right.
Hmm.
I did not know that I was going to be used that way. And if I had known that I would, so I have a problem not being completely honest, and so I'm about to be completely honest, and I hope that like, I don't want to put blame or pressure on anyone, but whenever I talk about pharmacology, one, I have 100 citations on my Google Drive about the fact that our current model of pharmacology when it comes to depression and anxiety is bullshit. And I will stand on that. And like, people think it's controversial, but like Kelly did in that documentary, like, if you actually start to investigate, you'll find that the biggest voices that have studied this thing for 20 years all say the same thing. And it's that we have been lied to. These things do not do what we think they do. And what really makes it fucked up is that um, what the public thinks the promises of antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds are, when you actually like, when a journalist will go interview the top people who are the psychiatrists and ask them, the psychiatrist will say, we never said that. That's what the marketing companies said, and they lied. And so it's a like that Spider-Man thing where like one points to one Spider-Man and one Spider-Man points to the other one. But so the research on that part of the documentary, like, it goes deep. But whenever I talk about it, I always add the caveat of this is not advice that you should get off of your antidepressants or anti-anxieties, because it's incredibly dangerous to do that on your own. And I'm not saying that they don't work. There is a specific set of people where it does work. And basically, what the best meta analysis show is that and this is radical, but this is also like, some of the best science that we've been able to do. And if someone wants citations, I can go find it. I don't have it off the top of my head, but one of the highest regarded like psychologists slash statisticians. I wish I could remember his last name. He did an epic meta analysis of all of the studies that looked at antidepressants. And what he found was there's one group where antidepressants perform higher than placebo. And that alone is already, like, most people don't know that that's actually the understood place that the scientific community is at, is that it doesn't outperform placebo in most cases when you do the studies properly and you don't hide results and then get sued, for $1 billion for lying in the studies, which is what has happened to most of the pharma companies. The one group is the most severely depressed, treatment resistant group will respond above placebo to an antidepressant for about 6 months. And so the specific use case of the most severely depressed, if they're used for about 6 months to help them like stabilize and then start to do other things in their life, that's where it works. And so I always offer the caveat of don't get off your antidepressants on your own. It's not safe. And two, it does work for some people. The thing that was interesting is that wasn't put into the documentary, and I don't know why. I'm 95% sure that I said it because I always say it, but I don't know for a fact. And if I had known that it was going to be woven in like that, I would have asked that that caveat be put in there.
But that makes me think, Eric, is that one issue? So in my head, like I wonder how you felt about that because there are some people that might have just come across your work or you for the first time in this documentary, and the way it's edited, it makes you say it gives the impression that you're saying something that you're actually not, and that feels unfair. And is that, do you think, a bigger issue in the culture where they're trying to make it a little more simplistic than it actually is?
So, like the way that my brain works is that documentary wasn't a big event to me. It was cool to see and like it brought me to tears because I thought it was beautiful. Like I really thought that they did a great job capturing the hard to express beauty that happens at you know where and what we do. And when I saw that part, there was a part of me that was like, "Ooh, I'm going to get hit for that." Like I felt it, like when it happened. But the deeper point is, one, like, uh, like it's it's hard to put into words, but I have this orientation towards life that I'm going to be doing what I'm doing until the day I die, and if I tell the truth, whatever happens, it'll be okay. And so there wasn't fear or like, and without getting into the nuances or the details, uh, I'm actually okay with that type of interpretation given my passion and anger at the facts of what has happened in biological psychiatry. And I do think, like, I trust the average person. I think that that's something that a lot of people, if they actually felt into, they don't. And so, like, I trust that, anyone who watches that documentary um, also has access to the internet and common sense. And, like, uh, when it comes to getting off of like antidepressants on your own, like, again, because I trust the average person, like, that's not something that people do flippantly. Or if they do it flippantly, it's not because they saw me on a fucking YouTube video. It's because a whole host of other things. So, it didn't land in me as like a problem, but it's also because it didn't land in me as a big event, but because it wasn't on my radar. Like I did an interview 8 months ago and I'm knee deep in all the things that I'm interested in. And then I saw it came out. I was like, oh, cool. And it's like, um, I like one of the things that's tough is because the shimmer is true and people are distracted. And because we know on a felt sense that what we do really helps and we don't really know how to talk about it, like there is a game to be played to get people's attention. And I don't like playing that game, but I also, like I'm glad that there are people who choose to play that game because, like, I am 100% confident that anyone who takes the leap to do fit for service with me, like with the class that I'm teaching, that it'll improve their life. And I haven't had a single person ask for a refund. And like, the testimonials would make you roll your eyes, you know? So,
I appreciate that, Eric. Yeah, thank you. Um, Man, you're a good guy. Like I appreciate I appreciate this. I just think the culture needs more of this. Um, and I guess to bring it back to the Shimmer, like you said, unfortunately, discussions like this don't get half or a quarter of the energy that the shiny, sexy documentary or the shiny, sexy 4 minute video or the kind of soundbite does. But ultimately, um, I guess if one, we can focus on our attention and our intention when we're going into the Shimmer, and if we're saying, right, I want to learn more about this pretty nuanced area, and you go in that, you'll find conversations like these, and you'll feel a bit more comfortable and probably less likely to make rash decisions. Because while I agree with you, like I do trust people as well, I think the internet has created, and because people are so politically unengaged, they don't have a sense of community. These kind of videos, or but not necessarily documentary I'm talking about, but generally these videos are like powerful people who can speak in a way that uh, in a speak in a way that appeals to a truth within the person without acknowledging some of the nuances and complexities. People can fall for that because it literally feels like, you know, like people think Trump is speaking for them, but there's more nuances that Trump's not talking about. You know what I mean?
sure.
Like, yeah, you're unhappy about this thing, and that's acknowledged, but we need more space for the nuanced conversations. And I guess a lot of what your project is doing with the Shimmer is helping people develop the capacity to navigate those complex discussions.
Right. Because at the root of it, it's like, for the people who want there to be more nuanced discussions, like I think a interesting experiment to run on yourself is track your behavior for a week, and it what is your current capacity to hold a nuanced, like, if we could completely objectively track how people watch YouTube videos, I would be willing to bet all the money that I have that even the people who are, you know, yearning for there to be more nuanced conversations, they do not watch an hour long anything without multitasking. It would be a feat that they would remember for a month if they watched a fucking YouTube, if they listened to our podcast without multitasking. It's not how, and it's because I think there is a global injury that has affected everybody. Everybody, even whoever the elites are, them and their children are also injured. Everybody's injured. And the injury is to our attentional system. And like for me, like what I would love to see would be like the people who listen to the conspirituality podcast and the podcasters themselves is critique by creating something. And like you could argue that the podcast that critiques is the creation, but I think that that's a safe creation. I think the brave creation is like create a community with the values that you want. Attempt to solve the problems that you want to solve instead of, you know, having a career of critiquing other people. And like if in the privacy of your own heart, your dharma is to be a critic, cool. But there's a sneaky suspicion in me that there is no one who, when they were a child, their dream for their life was, I'm going to critique other people who make, you know. I do think that there's a role for that. And I think that there is a way to do it that is art in and of itself. But there's a part of me that, like, here's what I see, man. Like, mythopoetically, I see a world on fire and all of us are injured. And most of our response to the injury is to yell about something. Whereas what I think a more productive response would be to start to pick up debris and start to create a space where the people who are the most hurt can like just like sit down for a moment. And like what I would love to see is more people attempting to make the solutions that they want, as opposed to pointing to other people that they think, have more power than them and wanting them to make the solution that they're currently not working towards. And I don't know if that's the case for, the conspirituality people, because I haven't listened to their podcast. And like, it's not because I'm avoiding their critique, it's that I'm making and my head's down and I'm doing my best to create solutions. And the one other point I want to make is that like I haven't proclaimed to the world what my life strategy is and what the stage is and what I want to do. But it's a straw man to say that what we're doing here at Fit First Service is, advocating that people endlessly work on themselves and that will just take care of the other problems. That's just not the case, and anyone who's in a room with us when we talk, they very quick, like it's the type of thing where it's like, if I talk about what I'm about to talk about, it sounds like I'm protesting too much. But the truth is, every single time that we have a meeting where people gather, every talk, like 90% of the time that someone is on stage speaking, the crux of the message is bring this home to your community and start to help in the way that you're inspired by us helping you. And, you know, um, I think the way that we start to address the larger problems is one, admit what your current level of competence is, and then fucking start practicing on the things that you need to practice on that will make you competent to actually do something. And so to go back to the example that we did with your friend, is it's like if you see a problem in the world, but you don't have a skill that you've developed to move the needle on that thing, start practicing. And it's like that feels like such an obvious duh if the genuine intention was to help that problem. But as a Jungian, it's very rarely genuine. It doesn't mean that a part of it isn't genuine, because I think there is a part of it that is desperately like feels the pain of the world, but it's actually a psychosomatic block that you're agreeing to subconsciously so you don't have to face the things that you could actually do something about right now, like stop lying to your partner about watching porn, or stop lying to yourself about, you have to work this job and you've been here for 3 years. Like that's a lie.
I appreciate this. Um, and one thing that I would add is, for instance, there's this beautiful story in the UK. I don't know if you saw it, like there was a lot of ethno-nationalist protests in the UK, and I saw this story where basically there had been these arranged protests around certain mosques. I forget what city it was, but a group of people had just decided to go to the mosque and to protect the mosque. People from all backgrounds, and that in itself stymied any kind of energy or kind of increasing population towards the actual protest of let's like damage the mosque. And it was a really beautiful example of not like, because I agree, again, what you're saying I believe to be true, but also these people probably went to work today or one day and said, later I'm going to go to that mosque. And there's not necessarily a skill here that I need to develop. I just need to stand up for what I believe to be true here. And enough people in the community did. And it really was this beautiful moment of, listen, we are all in this. And like we, again, what you're saying is that a lot of people have misdirected energy, or like they're placing a lot of their time in things that are not necessarily beneficial for them, which I agree. But this is also a moment where people have said, right, I don't need to get some particularly good at something, but if enough of us come together and stand for peace and love, that it can really do something big.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I love about that is like to really get down to the brass tacks of like what like the first aid kit that I'm trying to hand out to as many people as I possibly can is it's a two-part first aid kit. The first part is develop the capacity to focus, which is really just develop the capacity to attend to the present moment. And then two, develop the capacity to notice the whisper, whatever you want to call that thing, and then to act on it. And so you said that there wasn't a skill that they cultivated, but I would argue that the skill that every single person had that arrived at that mosque to protect it, they had some capacity to attend to the present moment, and they definitely had a abnormal skill of doing the courageous thing that their conscience asked them to do. And that's essentially like for 7 years, what I have been sharing as a coach for Fit for Service is learn how to attend to the present moment and learn how to notice the whisper and then have the courage to act on it.
That was a nice extension to that example. I appreciate that. Yeah, because it did take courage.
100%. Like, and that is definitely a skill that you
Mm-hmm.
can develop.
Mm-hmm. And these people could have easily just wrote in some comments or spent their evening online, like saying stuff that had a much less consequence on the local community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eric, this has been special, man. I really appreciate your time. If you're happy, we end every podcast with what lesson life is teaching you right now.
It's really funny what came up because there's a few, but the one that came up is if you this is so funny. Um Try the experiment for the next month to not masturbate and focus on having your partner feel well fucked. And the lesson that life has been teaching me is like, it is way more simple than you think, Eric. And it's literally just don't masturbate. Wait until you're with your partner and have
Like,
them
give it everything.
have them go to bed well fucked. And it's just like, whoa, all these things that I thought were things aren't things.
I can't think of a sweeter way to end it. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, well, thanks so much for your time, Eric. I really hope that the listeners appreciate what we were trying to do.
Yeah,
And
I massively appreciate your energy and where you're coming from. This was incredibly refreshing.
thank you, bro. Thank you.